The autumn rain drummed against the diamond-paned windows of the Thornhaven Tavern as Cassius Blackwood carefully spread his waterlogged maps across the scarred wooden table. His dark hair, streaked with premature silver despite his 32 years, clung damply to his forehead as he bent over the parchments. The tavern's warmth was a welcome relief after 3 days of riding through the storm, but it was the conversation at the next table that truly captured his attention. "Another one came through last week," an old farmer was saying, his weathered hands wrapped around a pewter mug. "Some lordling from the eastern kingdoms, all polish and pride. Rode right up to Ravencrest Manor with his entourage, convinced he'd be the one to wake her." "And," prompted the blacksmith, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Found him the next morning, same as all the rest. Alive, but changed. Wouldn't speak of what he'd seen, just kept muttering about shadows and sorrow. His men packed him up and left before noon." Cassius set down his quill, abandoning his notes about ley line convergences. "Forgive my intrusion," he said, turning slightly toward the men, "but you speak of someone under an enchantment." The tavern fell quiet, as if his words had drawn the attention of every patron. The farmer studied him with sharp blue eyes. "You're not from around here, are you, stranger? That accent. Valdres Academy, I'd wager." "Close. University of Astoria," Cassius replied, offering a self-deprecating smile. "I'm a scholar of ancient magical practices. The name is Cassius Blackwood." "Scholar, eh?" The blacksmith leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "Then you might find our local legend interesting, though I'd advise against getting any foolish notions." The farmer, who'd introduced himself as Willem, gestured for Cassius to join their table. 23 years ago, Lady Seraphina Ravencrest fell under a curse. She lies in eternal sleep in her family's manor, and every man who's tried to wake her has walked away broken in some fashion. "What manner of curse?" Cassius asked, his scholarly instincts fully engaged. He'd spent the better part of a decade studying such phenomena, traveling from kingdom to document cases of persistent enchantments. "That's where stories differ," Willem admitted. "Some say it was a jealous suitor who cursed her when she refused his hand. Others claim it was dark magic from the Shadowlands, meant to drain her beauty for some fell purpose. The only thing folks agree on is that she can't be woken, and those who try pay a price." The blacksmith, who went by Gareth, snorted. "Fools and glory seekers, the lot of them. Knights thinking their swords could cut through magic, wizards believing their spells were stronger than whatever binds her. Even had a prince come through 5 years back, certain his royal blood would make the difference. And he failed as well." "Worse than most," Willem said quietly. "Whatever he encountered in that manor left him screaming about betrayal and shadows. His guards had to drag him away in chains, and word came later that he'd taken his own life rather than live with the memory." Cassius felt a familiar stirring, the same intellectual hunger that had driven him to study the weeping stones of Mordhav and the singing towers of ancient Kelthra. But this was different. The pain in these men's voices spoke of something deeper than mere curiosity. "You knew her," he said. It wasn't a question. Willem's expression softened. Seraphina she was the light of this valley. Kind to everyone, high and low alike. Would bring medicine to sick children, help with harvests when families fell on hard times. When she was cursed." He shook his head. "It broke something in this place. We've been living in shadow ever since." "Tell me about the attempts to break the curse," Cassius said gently. "What exactly do these men encounter?" Gareth exchanged a look with Willem before answering. "Those who'll speak of it say the same thing. They enter the manor, find her sleeping in her tower room, beautiful as the day she was cursed. But when they try to wake her, kiss, spell, sword to break whatever binds her, the room fills with shadows that whisper of failures and fears. The shadows show them visions, they say. Dark truths about themselves, their motives. And then they understand they're not worthy," Willem finished. "That's what breaks them. Not the magic itself, but the realization that they came for glory, or beauty, or the prestige of being the one to succeed where others failed. The curse, it sees through them. Cassius sat back, his mind racing. This didn't sound like any standard sleeping curse he'd encountered in his studies. Those were typically straightforward, a magical binding that could be dissolved by the right counterspell or symbolic act. This sounded more like a test, a magical construct that evaluated intent. Has anyone ever tried simply talking to her? He asked. The question was met with blank stares. I mean, Cassius continued, if she's aware during this sleep, if the curse is somehow evaluating those who approach her, perhaps the solution isn't to break the enchantment by force, but to understand it. To communicate. She's been unconscious for over 2 decades, Gareth said skeptically. How do you talk to someone who can't hear you? Magic of this complexity often operates on multiple levels, Cassius explained, warming to the topic. The physical, the mental, the emotional. If her body sleeps but her mind remains active within the curse, there might be ways to reach her consciousness. Willem leaned forward, hope flickering in his weathered features. You think you could help her? Cassius chose his words carefully. I think I might understand what others have missed. Most who've attempted this approached it as a problem to be solved through strength or power. But what if the curse can only be broken through understanding? Through genuine connection rather than conquest. The tavern had grown completely quiet now, every patron straining to hear their conversation. The weight of their attention, their desperate hope, settled heavily on Cassius's shoulders. The manor's been empty for years, Willem said quietly. The family steward maintains it, but no one lives there anymore. If you're truly willing to try. I'll need to research first, Cassius said. Are there any local records? Books about the Ravencrest family, accounts of when the curse first struck. The village magistrate might have something, Gareth offered. And old Juniper, the healer, she was there when it happened. Might be willing to share what she remembers. As the rain continued to patter against the windows, Cassius felt the familiar thrill of discovery mixed with something else, a deep compassion for the sleeping woman and the community that had spent over 2 decades in her shadow. He'd come to Thornhaven following rumors of ley line anomalies, but he'd found something far more important, a puzzle that could only be solved with the heart rather than the mind. Tomorrow, he said finally, I'll begin my research. And when I understand what we're truly dealing with, I'll go to her. The hope that brightened every face in that tavern was both inspiring and terrifying. For the first time in his scholarly career, Cassius realized he wasn't just studying magic, he was about to become part of a story that had been waiting 23 years for its proper ending. In the space between sleeping and waking, where time moves like honey and thoughts drift like morning mist, Seraphina Ravencrest existed in a world of perpetual twilight. Her consciousness floated through landscapes that shifted with her emotions, sometimes the sun-drenched gardens of her childhood, sometimes the storm-lashed moors that matched her despair. She had long ago stopped counting the years, though she felt each one like a weight upon her dreaming soul. The curse had not stolen her awareness, as so many believed. Instead, it had trapped her in a prison of perception, where she could see and hear everything that happened in the waking world while remaining powerless to respond. She had watched every would-be hero who entered her tower room, felt their presence like ripples in still water, and witnessed their inevitable retreat when the curse showed them truths they weren't prepared to face. Today felt different, though she couldn't say why. The dreamscape around her had shifted from its usual melancholy gray to something softer, tinged with the pale gold of early dawn. She found herself in the library of Ravencrest Manor as it had been in her youth, before sorrow had settled over it like dust. Leather-bound volumes lined the shelves, their spines gleaming in warm lamplight, and the air carried the comforting scent of parchment and ink. Another one comes, whispered a voice that belonged to no one and everyone, the curse itself, speaking through the fabric of her dreams. Another seeker of glory. Seraphina had learned not to hope. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford, not after watching dozens of men enter her chamber only to flee in terror or madness. Yet something about this new presence felt different. Where others had approached with the thunderous certainty of conquest, this one moved with the quiet deliberation of someone who listened before acting. She closed her eyes, or performed the dreaming equivalent, and allowed herself to remember the day her world had shattered. It had been her 21st birthday, and Ravencrest Manor had been alive with celebration. Lords and ladies from across the kingdom had come to honor her, but none of their attention had mattered compared to the joy of sharing the day with her younger sister Morgana. Morgana, who had always been the shadowed moon to Seraphina's sun. Morgana, whose brilliant mind and fierce heart had been overlooked by everyone who saw only Seraphina's beauty and gentle nature. Morgana, who had smiled and laughed throughout the celebration while darkness grew in her heart like a poison flower. The memory played out around Seraphina with the vivid clarity that dreams sometimes possessed. She could see herself in her gown of midnight blue silk, moving through the crowd of well-wishers, unaware that her sister stood in an alcove, tears streaming down her face as she watched yet another potential suitor ignore her presence entirely. "They only see you," Morgana had whispered later that night when the guests had gone and the sisters stood alone in Seraphina's chamber. "Every man who comes here, every opportunity for marriage, for alliance, for love, it all flows to you like water to the sea." Morgana, that's not true. Morgana's laugh had been brittle as autumn leaves. "Lord Ashford didn't even acknowledge my existence tonight, and he's been corresponding with me for months about magical theory. But one look at you and suddenly I might as well be furniture." Seraphina had reached for her sister, her heart breaking at the pain in Morgana's voice. "You know I would never intentionally." "I know." Morgana's voice had softened then, and for a moment Seraphina had thought the storm would pass. "I know you don't mean to overshadow everyone around you. That's what makes this so much worse." The curse had come without warning, born from 21 years of accumulated resentment and fueled by magic that Morgana had been studying in secret. One moment Seraphina had been reaching for her sister's hand, and the next she had been falling into an abyss of enchanted sleep, Morgana's horrified scream echoing in her ears as consciousness fled. But the curse hadn't simply put her to sleep. It had bound her awareness to the manor itself, making her a witness to everything that followed. She had felt Morgana's immediate regret like a physical blow, had experienced her sister's frantic attempts to undo what she'd done. Every failed counterspell, every ritual that had only strengthened the curse's hold, Seraphina had lived through it all, unable to offer comfort or forgiveness. The dreamscape shifted around her, the cozy library dissolving into the tower room where her physical body lay. She could see herself as others saw her, unchanged by the passing years, lying on the four-poster bed with her auburn hair spread across the pillow like spilled wine. The curse had preserved her perfectly, a beautiful statue waiting for someone who would never come. Or so she had believed until now. The new presence drew closer, and with it came something unprecedented, genuine curiosity instead of desire, scholarly interest instead of conquest. Through the strange perception the curse granted her, she could sense his thoughts as he climbed the manor's stairs. Unlike the others, he wasn't thinking about glory or reward. His mind was occupied with questions about the nature of the enchantment itself, theories about how it might be constructed, wonder at the complexity of magic that could last over 2 decades. "This one seeks understanding," the curse whispered, and for the first time in years, its voice carried uncertainty instead of smug satisfaction. Seraphina felt her heart, or its dreaming equivalent, quicken with something that might have been hope. She had watched so many approach her sleeping form with lust or greed or simple arrogance, had seen the curse tear through their shallow motivations like tissue paper. But this man, this scholar, he carried a different quality of purpose. As he entered her tower room, she experienced his presence with startling clarity. Cassius Blackwood, she heard in his thoughts, though he spoke no words aloud. A man who had dedicated his life to understanding rather than conquering, who approached magic as a scholar rather than a wielder. She felt his genuine compassion as he looked upon her sleeping form, his sadness for her plight, his anger at those who had treated her curse as a puzzle to be solved for personal gain. "Lady Seraphina," he said softly, and the sound of her name spoken with such respect sent ripples through the dreamscape. "I'm not here to wake you with a kiss or break your bonds with a spell. I'm here because I think I think maybe no one has simply listened to what you might need. The curse stirred around them, shadows gathering in the corners of the room, but they moved with uncertainty. This approach was outside its parameters, beyond the patterns it had developed over decades of testing and rejecting would-be heroes. I've spent my life studying magic like yours, Cassius continued, settling into a chair beside her bed as if he intended to stay a while. Enchantments that test the heart as much as they bind the body. They're not meant to be broken by force, they're meant to be understood. So tell me, if you can, what do you need? In the dreamscape, Seraphina gasped. No one had ever asked her what she needed. They had all assumed they knew, a kiss, a spell, a sword to cut through her bonds. But he was asking her, speaking to her as if he somehow understood that she could hear. The shadows in the room writhed, the curse struggling to categorize this new type of intrusion. It had been designed to test worthiness, to reveal the selfish motivations that drove men to seek her hand. But what did it do with someone who sought nothing for himself? I think, Cassius said thoughtfully, that you've been aware this whole time. I think you've watched every person who's tried to help you, and I think you've seen the curse show them exactly why they weren't worthy of success. But I also think the curse might have been cast by someone who loved you, someone who regretted it the moment it was done. Seraphina's dream self reached toward him, her ethereal fingers passing through the air inches from his face. He was so close to the truth, closer than anyone had come in over 2 decades. The magic feels personal, he continued. Not malicious, but wounded. Like it was born from pain rather than malice. And if that's true, then perhaps it can't be broken until that pain is healed. The curse shuddered around them, and for the first time since it had been cast, Seraphina felt its grip on her consciousness waver. Not enough to wake her, but enough to hope. In the dreamscape, she began to weep tears of gratitude for this stranger who saw her not as a prize to be won, but as a person to be understood. I'm going to help you, Cassius promised, though he had no way of knowing she could hear. But first, I need to understand how this happened. I need to find the person who cast this curse and discover what pain they were carrying. Because I don't think you can be freed until they're freed too. As he rose to leave, promising to return, Seraphina felt something she hadn't experienced in 23 years, the possibility of hope. For the first time since the curse had been cast, someone had looked at her situation and seen not a challenge to overcome, but a story to understand. And in that understanding lay the first glimmer of the dawn she had been waiting for. The dreamscape around her brightened, and for a moment, she could almost feel the sun on her face. Morgana Ravencrest knelt in the garden behind the abandoned cottage she had called home for the past 15 years, her hands deep in soil that refused to yield anything but weeds and thorns. Once, she had possessed a gift for growing things, roses that bloomed in winter, herbs that held their potency for years, fruit trees that bore sweet harvests even in drought. Now, everything she touched withered within days, as if the curse she had cast upon her sister had poisoned her own connection to life's gentler magics. The morning mist clung to the valley floor, and through it came the sound of hoofbeats on the old manor road. Another seeker, no doubt, drawn by tales of the sleeping beauty and the glory that awaited whoever could wake her. Morgana's jaw clenched as she rose from her fruitless labors, wiping earth-stained hands on her rough brown skirt. 23 years of this, 23 years of watching fools and heroes march toward the manor while she lived in exile, forbidden by her own guilt from returning to the home where her sister lay trapped. But as the rider drew closer, something made her pause. The horse moved at a measured walk rather than the eager gallop she'd grown accustomed to, and its rider sat with the relaxed posture of someone deep in thought rather than consumed with anticipation. When he finally came into view, Morgana saw not a knight in shining armor or a lord bedecked in finery, but a simply dressed man with scholarly bearing and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the landscape around him. She ducked behind the gnarled apple tree at the edge of her garden, watching as he dismounted near the cottage's gate. He didn't move toward the manor immediately. Instead, he stood studying the overgrown path, the abandoned gardens, the way the very air seemed heavy with old sorrow. When his gaze fell upon her cottage, she held her breath, certain he would pass by as all the others had. Instead, he approached her gate. "Good morning," he called, his voice carrying the educated accent of the capital's universities. "I wonder if I might speak with you about the manor up the hill." Morgana remained hidden, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one ever sought her out. In the village, she was known only as the hermit woman who occasionally came to market for supplies, paying with gold coins that never seemed to run out and speaking to no one beyond what necessity required. They didn't know she was Seraphina's sister. She had made certain of that through subtle enchantments that clouded memory and encouraged people to look away. "I know you're there," the man said gently. "I'm not here to force conversation, but I think you might be the only person who can help me understand what really happened to Lady Seraphina." The words hit Morgana like a physical blow. She pressed her back against the apple tree's rough bark, 23 years of carefully maintained anonymity crumbling around her. How could he possibly know? "My name is Cassius Blackwood," he continued. "I'm a scholar, not a knight or prince seeking glory. I've been researching the curse, and everything I've learned suggests it wasn't cast by an enemy or a jealous suitor. The magic is too personal, too precise. It was cast by someone who knew Lady Seraphina intimately, someone who—" His voice softened. "Someone who loved her and has been suffering ever since." Morgana closed her eyes, feeling tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years threatening to spill over. She had always known this day might come, when someone would see through the lies and half-truths that surrounded Seraphina's curse. But she had hoped it never would, had prayed she could carry her secret to the grave and spare the world the truth of what she had done. "I won't leave," Cassius said quietly. "I'll wait here all day if necessary. Because I believe you're the key to freeing her, and I think you want that more than anyone." The simple truth of his words broke something inside her. With shaking hands, Morgana stepped out from behind the tree, revealing herself to another person's direct gaze for the first time in over a decade. She was 41 years old now, though the guilt and isolation had aged her beyond her years. Her once bright auburn hair had faded to dull brown streaked with premature gray, and her green eyes, so like Seraphina's, held depths of sorrow that made her look decades older. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. "And you certainly shouldn't go to the manor. The curse." She swallowed hard. "It doesn't just test those who would wake her. It feeds on their failures, grows stronger with each attempt." Cassius studied her with the patient attention of a scholar examining a particularly complex text. "You're her sister," he said. It wasn't a question. Morgana's composure finally cracked. "I'm the monster who destroyed her life," she whispered. "I'm the one who cast the curse that has kept her sleeping for 23 years, and I'm the coward who has hidden here ever since, too afraid to face what I've done." "May I come in?" Cassius asked. "I think there's a story here that needs telling, and I suspect you've been carrying it alone for far too long." Against every instinct that screamed at her to send him away, to maintain the isolation that had become both her prison and her protection, Morgana found herself nodding. She led him through the cottage's front door into a space that reflected her inner state, clean but sparse, functional but devoid of warmth or comfort. Books lined every wall, but they were all texts on curse-breaking, magical theory, anything that might help her undo what she had done. 23 years of research that had yielded nothing but deeper understanding of her own failure. "It was jealousy," she said without preamble as they sat at her small wooden table. "Pure, poisonous jealousy that I thought I could control until the moment it controlled me instead." She told him everything then, about growing up in Seraphina's shadow, about watching every opportunity for love or recognition flow naturally to her beautiful, kind sister while she remained invisible. She spoke of the years she had spent studying forbidden magic in secret, telling herself it was merely intellectual curiosity while she gathered power that whispered of darker uses. The night of her 21st birthday party, Morgana continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I watched Lord Ashford, a man I had been corresponding with for months, a man I thought might see beyond Seraphina's beauty to appreciate my mind, fall under her spell within moments of meeting her. And something inside me just broke. What exactly did you cast? Cassius asked. His tone held no judgment, only the careful attention of someone seeking to understand. A sleep curse, but not a simple one. I wove it with intention magic, binding it to the concept of worthiness. I told myself I was protecting her from men who only wanted her for her beauty, that the curse would only lift when someone truly worthy came along. Morgana's laugh was bitter. But the truth was darker. I made it so that no one would ever be worthy enough, because I couldn't bear the thought of her having the love I believed I would never find. And the moment you cast it, you realized what you'd done. The moment I cast it, I watched my sister, the person I loved most in the world despite my jealousy, fall into a sleep that might never end. I felt the curse take hold, felt how it twisted my intentions into something crueler than I had ever meant. Tears flowed freely down Morgana's cheeks now. I've spent every day since trying to undo it. I've consulted with every magical scholar in 3 kingdoms, attempted counterspells that nearly killed me, even tried to transfer the curse to myself. Nothing works. The magic is bound too tightly to my original emotions, and those emotions, they're still there, Cassius. Buried deep, but still poisoning everything I touch. Cassius was quiet for a long moment, his scholarly mind clearly working through the implications of what she told him. The curse feeds on the failures of those who try to break it, he said finally. Each failed attempt strengthens it because each failure confirms the twisted logic you built into it, that no one will ever be worthy of her. Exactly. And with each failure, I fall deeper into despair, which strengthens the curse further. It's a cycle I created and can't break. Morgana's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I've destroyed both our lives, and I don't know how to fix it. What if, Cassius said carefully, the curse can't be broken by changing its external conditions, but only by healing the internal wound that created it? What if the key isn't finding someone worthy of Seraphina, but helping you forgive yourself? Morgana stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign tongue. Forgive myself? I cursed my own sister out of petty jealousy. I've robbed her of 23 years of life, love, everything that makes existence worthwhile. How could I possibly? Because she would forgive you, Cassius interrupted gently. If she could speak, if she could act, what would she say to you right now? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge Morgana was afraid to cross. She knew the answer, had always known it, but admitting it would mean accepting a truth that felt too large for her guilt-shrunken heart to hold. She would forgive me, Morgana whispered. She always forgave me, even when we were children and I broke her favorite doll in a fit of rage, even when I spoke cruel words I didn't mean. She would forgive me and ask why I couldn't forgive myself. Then perhaps, Cassius said, that's where we begin. Not with grand gestures or powerful magic, but with the simple act of accepting that you deserve the same compassion you would show to anyone else who had made such a mistake. As the afternoon light slanted through the cottage windows, Morgana found herself speaking of things she had never dared voice aloud, her fears, her regrets, her desperate love for the sister she had wronged. And for the first time in 23 years, the crushing weight of her guilt began to shift, just slightly, as if a door long sealed might finally be ready to open. The curse that bound Seraphina had been born from Morgana's pain, and perhaps, just perhaps, it could be ended by her healing.